We're sitting down with Morris Davis, a man of a very interesting career. He was the chief prosecutor for the military tribunals at Guantanamo Bay. In 2007, he resigned over his objection to the use of evidence obtained by torture and to what he saw as growing political interference in those military tribunals. Now he says although President Obama promised to shut down Guantanamo, he doesn't have the, using Colonel Davis's own terms, the balls to do that. Colonel Davis, could you clarify that latest statement for us?
Sure. He was elected, and I was thrilled, that he took office, and the first thing he did was sign an order closing Guantanamo within 1 year of his order, which was signed in January of 2009. And we're sitting here today, and Guantanamo is still open. The military commissions have resumed, and in my view, the president just didn't have the balls to follow through with doing the right thing.
Do you think it's because when he became president, he learned things that he hadn't known before?
I don't know if he learned things that he didn't know before, or he faced a bigger obstacle than he anticipated. Saying, the slogan, "Close Guantanamo," sounds fairly simple. Actually following through and doing it is a much more difficult process.
They're saying the reason we're not shutting down Guantanamo is because we don't know what to do with remaining detainees. Other countries don't want to have them.
Well, we haven't helped ourselves in that front. The Uyghurs, for instance, the Chinese Muslims that were cleared years ago, is not being a threat to the U.S. We've begged 24 countries to help us out. They're not a threat. Take the Uyghurs. And a few countries did. A couple of years ago, a judge here in Washington, D.C. ordered the Uyghurs released and brought to the U.S. And suddenly our government said, oh no, they're too dangerous. We can't have them in the U.S. So while we begged other countries to help us out and take some of the detainees, we've never been willing to take one ourselves. So we're a little hypocritical on that front.
Colonel Davis, you were the chief prosecutor at Guantanamo. I want to know, how did you go from being an advocate of the process to being a hardline critic of the practices?
I took the job as chief prosecutor in September of 2005, and I believed at the time, and did for most of my tenure, that we were committed to having full, fair, and open trials. My policy had been we were not going to use any evidence obtained by waterboarding or any of the other enhanced interrogation techniques that most people call torture, and I had support above me for doing that. Then in the summer of 2007, some new people came in and said, wait a minute, President Bush said we don't torture. So if President Bush says we don't torture, who are you to say that we do? And we've got all this information that was collected that you're not using, you need to get in there and use it. And that was when I felt that our commitment to full, fair, and open trials had diminished, and I submitted my resignation.
What would you say to those who claim the difference between President Obama and President Bush as far as their anti-terrorism policies is Bush would detain the suspects, torture them, prosecute them. President Obama just kills them, doesn't have to go into all that detention trouble.
Well, certainly, I think there's some facts to support that perception. Like I said, candidate Obama said all the right things about justice and American values and closing Guantanamo and doing away with military commissions and upholding the rule of law. And then once he gets in office, he didn't just embrace the Bush policies, he kissed them on the lips and ran with them, and has advanced them further than President Bush ever did, like killing an American with a drone strike in Yemen.
Anwar al-Awlaki.
Correct, which is just astounding that an American president can make the unilateral decision that an American...
Well, they're saying he was a really bad guy. He deserved it.
Well, if bad guys need to die, there are a lot of other people I could put on that list. But an American citizen, for an American president to make the unilateral decision that a civilian agency, the CIA, would go to another country and launch an offensive military operation, fire a missile, and kill an American and bystanders. It wasn't just Anwar al-Awlaki that was killed. There were 4 people killed that day. I'm not aware of any legal justification for that. I think it's called murder, to kill another human being deliberately without legal justification.
Are drones becoming the new arm of the U.S. justice?
There's nothing wrong per se with drones. I mean, it's just another weapon system. It's basically an airplane with a pilot sitting in a lounge chair rather than the cockpit. It's how they're used that concerns me. if they're being used to avoid complying with the law and giving people due process in their day in court, then that's a sad chapter in America's history if that's what we're doing. We've always, our strength for 200 years was the law, not turning our back on it. So if the administration is choosing, if it has a choice between kill or capture, and they're choosing kill just because that's the easy route, and that's a sad commentary on America in 2011.
Yeah, we hear that all the time. A U.S. drone killed 10 terrorists in Pakistan, as if that's beyond reasonable doubt that those were terrorists.
I think it's another black spot on the American reputation. Would we condone it if these were American citizens being killed by another government under similar circumstances? It's great when we're the country that has the drones. It may not be quite as great when other countries have that same capability that are used against us. And crossing another border, launching an offensive attack, often conducted by the CIA, which is a civilian agency. They're not the military. They don't have combatant immunity. And for the president to send them out to conduct offensive military operations, it's just unprecedented.
You're talking about due legal process. Do they think if they operate outside the United States, everything is just legally fine?
Well, I guess we're fortunate that America is the 600-pound gorilla in the playground. I mean, who's going to tell us we can't? Which is fine as long as we're the big kid on the playground, but we may not always be in that status. We're supposed to set the example, a positive example. We claim to be the champion of the rule of law, but it seems that we're a champion of the rule of law when we're trying to apply it to others, not so much when we're looking in the mirror at ourselves. The Convention Against Torture, for instance, we're a signatory to that. You saw recently at the Republican presidential debates where candidates said they would resume waterboarding. So, we love to criticize other countries, but we're not so good at holding up the mirror to ourselves.
You were the chief prosecutor at Guantanamo. I was just wondering, what was the ratio of people who got into Guantanamo for a reason, real bad guys, and those who, let's say, did not deserve Guantanamo treatment?
Well, if you accepted the Bush administration's characterization, you recall maybe Donald Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense, saying, these men are the worst of the worst. They chew through the hydraulic lines on the airplane on the way to Guantanamo just to kill Americans. I think a lot of people bought that narrative, that all of these guys are the worst of the worst. There were a total of about 775 men that have been at Guantanamo at some point in time. There are about 170 left today. So more than 600 have been released or transferred back to their country of origin or some other country, most of those by the Bush administration. So, if these guys were all the worst of the worst, the hardened terrorists that were out to kill Americans, it seems strange that we would send more than 600 of them out of Guantanamo.
The reason I asked is a former Guantanamo detainee told me when they seized him in Pakistan, Pakistani authorities were so anxious to give the Americans some numbers, in heads, that they couldn't care less about due legal process. He was tortured, he was sent to Guantanamo, spent a few years there before being released. On a different note, if President Obama during his next presidential campaign again promises to shut down Guantanamo and says, well, this time, yes we will and yes we can, would you believe him?
I believed President Obama the first time he told me he was going to close Guantanamo. I had recently retired from the military when he was running for president, and for the first time in my adult life, I got to participate in a campaign. The military stays out of politics, so after I retired, I put an Obama sign in my front yard. I donated to the campaign. I went door to door campaigning for him. Somebody came in my yard, set my Obama sign on fire, and I put up another one. So I believed in this hope and change that he promised.
What you're saying reminds me, someone wisely said, it's useless to hold a person to anything he says while he's in love, drunk, or running for office.
Or all three at the same time, which would be even worse. But, I've seen his lips move before and say the right words. I'll believe it when I see it.
Thanks for the interview, sir.
My pleasure.
Thank you for your time.